How's it going, New World? Sethphir here, and we are back with another mutation video. This time we will be taking a look at difficulty 3, which is going to be the start of the intermediate level. So in addition with the normal bonuses from the Eternal series, we will now have another set of promotions, which will include the vampiric buff to all enemies or that apply within the dungeon, as well as the phalanx buff, which phalanx is very obnoxious if you haven't dealt with it quite yet. It's going to put a frontal shield on certain monsters that will block all damage, as you can see a little bit up ahead, and it will only allow you to shoot ranged projectiles from behind. So your ranged DPS is going to have to deal with this. This also affects the way that life staff users play, because you're not able to attack into that shield, therefore you're now getting cooldowns, and it will drop a lot of your buffs like the orb and the beacon right below the shield instead of actually hitting the monster. So there's going to be a lot less damage opportunities for ranged. It's kind of like an anti-ranged punishment mechanic, so to say. It's a little wonky. The biggest thing that we saw here was the Vampirism 2 buff, which means that all monsters are going to be life leeching an extra amount in addition to the life leech that they were already doing with the void dot over time as a bonus onto their damage abilities and attacks. So we had to kind of adjust for this later on within the strategies of like the difficulties of immediate, because it became very difficult right around like that 4-6 mark or so. Some of these monsters already had life leech built into them within the Dynasty Shipyard as well, so it made the first boss like the hardest boss in the instance, or the first, like the second or so named guy, like that first guy that we walked in, we just fought, that summoner. That guy was so hard on the higher intermediate difficulties, and I'm sure he's going to be even worse on hard difficulty with some of the extra mechanics coming in. But the biggest difference that we saw throughout this was that we felt a bit more pressured for time. Like we were like, oh no, we need to like actually start moving, like we need to pick up the pace, we need to do bigger pools, we need to have people assigned to loot the certain you know, objectives within the area so that we could get everything done. So we like that, like that rush of the pace. Like it was forcing us to play the game better, to learn some strategies that would increase the speed of our run, the efficiency of our run, and definitely force us to tune our composition and our like build a little bit. So we had to do a little bit of adjustment for that as well. It was not entirely too difficult, to be fair. You can still breeze through the 3 difficulty pretty easily with any decently geared group. If you're running in with like 550s, it's gonna be really hard, but if you got somewhere near 600 gear, you're probably gonna do quite all right. We did notice a significant increase in the amount of loot and drop rewards. We were getting a lot more purples and definitely more legendaries, and this seemed to be the trend as we got higher and higher in the difficulties. And when we got into the higher intermediate level difficulties, we were getting so many legendaries a run, it was actually crazy. So the loot reward scaling is definitely escalating to a really good point. The timers and objectives within the intermediate level were not too shabby. We were able to beat majority of them. The one we had trouble with was the respawn indicator, which was like if you had full died, then there was only 3 lives. So you can full die 3 times. People can full die 3 times. And that was definitely a little difficult in this area because there was a lot going on with all the spellcasters, and they were life leeching into infinity, and there was all kinds of AoE damage going out, and it took us a while to really figure out the paranoia mechanic, because before we went ahead and like ignored this mechanic on the lower difficulty for the most part, but then it got a rank up, so like I don't think it was no longer Paranoia 1, it was Paranoia 2, which meant that it started to hurt, and we were like, oh no, how do we deal with this? Like I started to learn that, hey, I can't actually go in and DPS with the Void Blade as a healer because I'm just dropping bombs on my whole team and it's just not worth, right? Like I need to keep healing. I don't have time to actually go in and use the Void Blade for DPS where I usually had before. So I actually had to change my entire build going into this. I have to shift everything up. Everything I thought I knew about Void Gauntlet in the dungeon, I now have to rework it. And you'll see that adjustment later on in the higher difficulties. I'll start switching to Orb of Decay over the Void Blade because it just it's better, and like especially with these large clumps of monsters. So I had to kind of see where this was going, and even with my skills here, I learned that, you know, these heal over time effects are very powerful on the life staff. I know a lot of people use Divine's Embrace and some Light's Embrace and all these other things, but really the heal over time and the amount of buffs that you're going to give to your group coming in is very good. I'll keep experimenting with builds. Maybe there'll be a really big need for some stuff later, but that was pretty much my feedback from that perspective. The one thing I did notice was that our tank was having a lot less time to actually DPS and put buffs up, and was forced to block and or mitigate somehow majority of his time while he was encountering the monsters, right? So we're now seeing a world where, you know, the tank can't just pull out the hammer and start helping to DPS. He needs to keep blocking, especially with this vampirism mechanic, because every time the tank was getting hit, he was getting hit for like 6, 7k or something like that. They were hitting him really hard, and then they were life leeching off of that. So they were almost healing themselves up to full HP by just dealing damage. So mitigating the damage, like a hard mitigation, like you dodge the move or you block the move, was the way to go. I don't think you could just power through and tank a lot of this damage to the face and it'll all be all right, right? Like, I don't think that's something that you could do. You have to do something a little bit more. So tanking is an actual thing in this dungeon. It's not just like, hey, you're a tank, do some damage while you tank. You actually need to tank and mitigate damage. So this is going to be a very interesting thing coming in. And then later on, we'll see some more mechanics that'll probably force us to do pretty much the exact same thing. So that shield is very vital. And sadly, I think this means the death of the paladin healer build. The one I was theory crafting a bit. I don't think that's going to be possible in these high level dungeons. I'll try it for the memes, for the lulz, and see if we can clear a 10 with it eventually. But it's going to be incredibly difficult to just soak all this damage with your face and not actually reduce it in some way, shape, or form. So we'll keep an eye out for that and see how that goes. But that's going to be about the breakdown that I would see. The other thing that we ran into was that having too many melee was not great, right? We ran into the big issue where we would have a bunch of melee piled up on each other, but they would all trigger explosions from the paranoia, and then the paranoia would delete them. So we had to actually spread it out a little bit, so we had a bit of a hybrid. And this composition, we have a ranger, we have a Bodex player, as well as one bruiser player, Great Axe Warhammer, and then we have a mage. So that's going to be our 3 DPS breakdown, which kind of spreads out the fight. And, you know, as I mentioned before, I'm like, oh, I want to use this Void Blade, but if I go in, I just get my team killed because I'm another melee in the pile, which is just, you know, blowing everyone up at the same time. So that's definitely a no-go for this. So after everything was said and done, the intermediate level was very fun. It was a nice challenge. It was not too challenging. Like, you don't have to be a mythic WoW raider or a top 1%er in order to clear this. You just have to be able to, like, do decent and have a okay understanding of your class and have some gear that symbolizes endgame in some degree, right? Like, it can't just be completely useless gear. It's gotta be something halfway decent so that, you know, at the very least, just high item level. The stats don't have to be perfect, but if it's high item level, you will get by, and that should suffice for these types of runs. We started experimenting with point timers, because each enemy seems to be giving like a set amount of points, and then the named monsters are giving a little bit more. So we're trying to target named or regular enemies that give high, like, or decent point value but have low health. So some of these people, like this spearman here, this summoned spearman, he takes a long time to kill because he has a lot of life leech. He does a ton of damage, so he just keeps healing himself back to full. So we found that fighting those guys is not ideal, and going after people like the musket guys in here is a lot better because they have a very low HP pool, and they do higher damage as a trade-off, but it seems to just be more worth our time to kill these guys. And I'm leaning more towards beating the timer means a lot more than everything. We did another experiment where we failed the timer and we just completely ignored the timer and did every other thing. But the problem with that was every minute that you go past the timer, you lose a lot of points. I think it was like 300 or something. It's like 5 points a second, something crazy like that. And you will exceed that time very crazy, like very fast, like in the late game. So we had a run that was like 48 minutes long, and we had like 7,000 points at the end. We're like, oh yeah, and we're gonna get this multiplier times whatever. It's gonna be great. And then we looked at the end, and it was like, oh, minus 5,000 points or something from, you know, going over the time. We were just like, well, we had 0 points. We got like a 0 multiplier. We're like, well, that did not work at all, you know, for science. So that was an interesting thing to run across. But the biggest thing that I've seen in these dungeons, to be fair, is that the named enemies and the pools are the hardest. Namely, the pools with the named enemies. The bosses themselves are decently difficult, but they're not the biggest challenge within the dungeon, I would say. That might change later on. I know that some of the enemies were getting some interesting mechanics, but the bulk of the work is from dealing with the waves of enemies that come before the bosses, kind of just like it within the mythic dungeons and stuff. You know, the bosses are decently hard, but they aren't the, you know, the thing that's gonna make you lose in this dungeon. What's gonna make you lose is your timer and the way you deal with some of these enemies. If you're taking way too long to kill packs of enemies or groups of enemies and you're not pulling efficiently, you will easily find yourself in a very bad position to, you know, lose the game, right? Like, because all your points are gonna be drained from the timer. And the other thing that we kind of saw was just like the objectives, so making sure you know the pathing to get all the named monsters, because that's kind of an easy win. It's not too bad to do. But as you can see, we got a gold clear difficulty with 56,000 points. That's with the ×5 multiplier. So we hit every multiplier except for the respawn category, which is a little low in my opinion. It's not very generous on that, but maybe it's about right. We'll keep testing that into the higher difficulties and see how it goes, but it almost seems like nobody's going to be hitting that one. And you can see the score breakdown on the screen, as well as the codex, which allows you to go to the next level, mutation difficulty. A codex is just simply showing you the highest difficulty that you've beaten. You do have to work your way from the ground up. And then a couple of umbral shards, which is going to let us power up our gear for the future expeditions. But all right, everyone, thanks for your time and watching. This has been the intermediate difficulty gold clear rank. So I hope you enjoyed that content, and we will bring you a hard version of it that will have the breakdown of the other mechanics, which are super fun. So I can't wait to get into that one and share that with you, maybe later today, but possibly tomorrow, and we'll go ahead and take a look at those. Thanks for your time and watching the video. We have a subscribe, like, and join button down below if you're interested in becoming a member today. Make sure to hit that bell. We also have a Discord and Twitter in the description link, so you can follow us on social medias and keep up to date with the latest guide. We're going to show you everything, the hard mode, the elite mode, all the good modes, and what you need to know for each week. This was the Eternal series week. Next week it will shift up, and I know that we have Garden of Genesis, which just recently came out with the Hellfire mutation, so we are hard at work on that already. We are clearing through and progressing, so we'll be bringing you guides and videos so that you have a great idea of what you're going to be dealing with when it hits on the live servers. Thanks for your time and watching, and we will catch you in the next video.